Welcome to Journeys with the No Schedule Man, exploring authentic stories of personal growth and lessons learned from people living true to themselves with creativity, passion, and purpose. For all past episodes, subscribe at iTunes or visit noscheduleman.com. And please connect, share, and contribute with a comment, rating, or review. And now, here's your host, the No Schedule Man, Kevin Bulmer.
I've been known to struggle with reality, not that it is any real mystery.
The question is, how far would you be willing to go to make a difference for someone you love and for something that you believe in? And what's one thing that you could do just to take that first step and get started? Welcome, I'm Kevin Bulmer. This is Journeys with the No Schedule Man, exploring conversations on personal and professional growth and authentically sharing in an effort to empower each other as we all grow together. You can find all past episodes of this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and at noschedulemanpodcast.com. And if you find this helpful, I hope you'll subscribe and stay the course with us. And please do share it with someone else and invite them to come along. Today we're joined by John Davidson, an incredibly kind and compassionate man who has had an extraordinarily positive impact on millions of people around the world. Some have benefited directly through the formation of the Jesse's Journey organization and all of the research and proactive work that has been done to combat Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy thanks to John and his family. Countless others have been inspired and empowered by viewing John's example, the example of his son Jesse, his wife Sherene, and all the selfless volunteers who not only helped John make Jesse's journey into a living and breathing entity, but who continue to blaze the trail and keep that work going today. Most people in Canada over the age of 30 or so will automatically have an idea of who John Davidson is, or they'll have heard the name, or they'll know some version of the story. But to provide context to anyone from around the world of any age, I want to give you just a little bit of background before we hear John tell part of his story in his own words. In the mid-1980s, John's son, Jesse, was diagnosed with Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, which is a progressive genetic muscular system disease that gradually weakens the body's muscles. Duchenne's an incurable and severe form of muscular dystrophy that occurs most commonly in children. Now, in the years that followed that diagnosis, John and his wife Sherene realized that the only way that they could ever really find a cure for Duchenne would be through research. And they knew that that was going to require enormous investment and enormous commitment. What was referred to as Jesse's Journey was then born with the mission, initially, to raise research money in order to find a cure for Jesse and for others suffering from Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy. In the summer of 1995, at the age of 49, John set out on an incredible mission to push Jesse, who was wheelchair-bound at 15 years old at the time, across the province of Ontario. Now that's 3,339 kilometers, which equates to over 2,074 miles. So if you're from another part of the world, I don't know, look it up on Google Maps to see how far that is. It's a long way. It was an enormous undertaking and an absolutely extraordinary accomplishment. Well, that grueling test of endurance generated $1.5 million for research. That alone would have been astounding. But as it turned out, the journey was just beginning. 3 years later, in 1998, John set out on an even more imposing adventure, spending 286 consecutive days on the road. I'm going to say that again. Think about this. 286 consecutive days on the road. He journeyed 8,300 kilometers all the way across the entire country of Canada on foot. That's over 5,157 miles that John walked, never sleeping in the same bed for almost 300 straight nights, walking over 30 kilometers every single day for more than 3/4 of a full calendar year. To put this into further context, to give you an idea of just how large a country geographically Canada is, and I'm going to do that because I know that we've got people from various countries around the world that listen to this podcast. At over 9,900,000 square kilometers, Canada could easily fit into it in a geographic sense. The land that is occupied by India, Mexico, Egypt, France, Spain, Japan, Germany, Italy, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, all inside Canada, and still have about 1 million square kilometers of land to spare. It's a big country. And John Davidson walked across it. By the way, John is the Guinness Book of World Records holder for the fastest crossing of Canada on foot. He's also the recipient of the Order of Ontario and the Queen Elizabeth II Jubilee Medal, among many other accolades and honors. Now, that trip across Canada in 1998 generated $2 million in grassroots donations made by Canadians all across the country, and the movement has only grown from there. The rest, I'd prefer to let you hear straight from John as he tells just what's an absolutely extraordinary story and shares so many valuable insights and life lessons that I really hope that you listen carefully and maybe even more than once. As you'll hear, there is an incredible amount of wisdom to be absorbed from what John has to share about his experiences. But here are just 3 of the many things that really stood out to me from his conversation that I encourage you to listen for. Number 1, you must make start. Now, I'm not saying that incorrectly. He tells the story about where that phrase came from and why it's so important. You must make start. And you can throw whatever cliche that you want to on here. The journey of 1,000 miles, and this one is literally, begins with a single step. That's literally what happened here. But nothing happens unless you get started. Or in John's words, you must make start. Number 2, knowing who you are. I feel really passionate about this. Perhaps because I'm aware that I got it so wrong for so much of my life. I thought I knew who I was when, as it turns out, I really didn't have much of an idea. I was following people who didn't know where they were going and listening to people that really didn't have much of value to say. There was a lot of copycat stuff going on there. Chasing tails. But really being in touch with and aware of who you are means that you bring contentment with you wherever you go. You don't need circumstances to change to find happiness. You bring happiness to any circumstance, knowing who you are. Number 3, people are great. Take it from a guy who walked across the second largest country in terms of geographic landmass in the world. John Davidson met a lot of people, and what he found and what he shares is that people are great. I realize I've used this word a few times already, but I'm going to use it one more time. This is an extraordinary story. You're going to love it. Settle in and come along as we explore part of the journey of John Davidson on Journeys with the No Schedule Man. John, what do you remember about going through your mind in those moments, either just before or as you were dipping your shoe back into the water in Beacon Hill Park in Victoria?
I think during the time period that I was on the road, it seemed like a long time. And it was 286 days, 10 months. And yet when we got to Beacon Hill Park and I went down those stairs and you're suddenly going to put your toes of the running shoe into the Pacific Ocean, and I decided that day to put on pair number 1. They were all numbered, and I hadn't worn number 1 since day 1, so I thought, yeah, it makes logical sense to bookend these, so I put that pair on just to finish in. And when I got down to the water, that's when it was a complete flip for me. Like, it was almost like, didn't we just start yesterday?
Yeah.
You really couldn't believe that you were there. And not only that, I think in a selfish way, I didn't want it to end, but I was glad it was over too.
Tell me more about that, not wanting it to end. Why would you consider that selfish?
Well, it would have been selfish to want to keep going and going and going because I was the one getting so much out of it, because you met so many people each and every day and you got to hear their story. And that started back in Newfoundland when every day there were new volunteers who came out, whether they were, perhaps Rotarians or Lions or from the Kiwanis Club or whatever it might be. And our team had reached out in advance, so these people were showing up. They had no idea what to expect that day, except they knew they were spending the day and 33 kilometers on the road with these people from Ontario and this guy who's walking or attempting to walk across Canada. So I think all through the first month, every morning, people would say to me, "So, tell me all about Jesse's journey." And I made it through a couple of weeks of that, and then I thought, wait a second, this is backwards. So I just gave them the Cole's Notes version in the first few minutes, and I thought they'll learn more about Jesse's journey as the day goes on. But what I'm missing is my chance to learn about them. So I would say to people, "So tell me your life story." And they'd say, "Pardon?" I'd say, "Yeah, just start with when you were born." I said, "We got a lot of time out here. I'd love to hear what you're all about."
We're not going to run out of road.
We're not going to run out of road. And so they would actually do that. And then sometimes they would be quite surprised at themselves that they would be like looking at their watch and saying, "I can't believe I've been talking that long." And then I would sometimes ask them questions to expand a bit on, that story about the first car they bought or when they got married or birth of their children, whatever it was, something that they had brought up that I thought was interesting, and I'd ask them to expand on that a little more. And at the end of the day, they gave you a really genuine handshake because they really liked the idea that somebody gave a care about them and wanted to hear what their story was, because lots of times they'd never been asked. And sometimes we fall into that habit, even at home. You come home and how was your day, and what time's the Leaf game start tonight, and are we having that for supper? And things can become repetitious, and that's understandable. But when they become kind of dull repetition, then it slips a little further the conversation level. So it's really nice to come home at the end of the day and have some enthusiasm and not be completely worn out, to genuinely want to know what your partner did all day and to get kind of energized from that. And we do that on a personal level here by not having television on the main floor. That television's a destination. It's not just a kitchen companion. And I think that prompts conversation. And I've always liked, after a 30-year career in radio, I guess I've always liked conversation. But people on the road really enjoyed that, and I got off the hook because I didn't have to tell them all about Jesse's journey. But by the end of the day, they'd learned enough about it.
What are some of the reasons, do you think, John, two-pronged here? A, that people wanted to actively seek you out, and B, that they would be so comfortable in telling those stories to you when they may not otherwise have been used to sharing them?
Well, I think it's the kind of work that you're doing right now. You're asking people to share their stories, and there are ways to do that. You can't be demanding about it. People have to want to share their story, and sometimes they think their story is nothing. Everybody has a story, and you just have to find the soft, gentle way of getting that story out of them, and just kind of grease the skids a bit and get the story started, and they'll follow through and tell you the whole thing. And sometimes they'll tell you very personal stuff too, that they didn't think they had the capability of sharing with somebody, particularly a stranger they'd never met before. But that happened a lot. Sometimes people would be quite moved because they're walking along with somebody whose story is moving them. So therefore they felt, it's okay for me to tell you something very private and moving about my life. So it was a great dialogue that went on, and it did get very personal sometimes, and it was quite interesting. So when I got to Beacon Hill Park in British Columbia, in Victoria, BC, I certainly I knew that part was coming to an end. And that's where I was being a bit selfish, that I did want that to carry on, because I wasn't going to have those people to talk to the next day.
One of the reasons why I wanted to ask you that is that the whole initial, the quest, and what has become something much bigger than that we can talk about if you like, but referred to as a journey, Jesse's journey. I've also chosen a form of that word for the name of this podcast, Journeys with the No Schedule Man. And but each journey starts with a destination, a conclusion in mind. And ironically, it seems to be that once that conclusion is reached, there almost seems to be a bit of a feeling of loss, in a sense, with that. It seems a bit, not paradoxical, but ironic that once you would achieve what it was that you set out to do, perhaps you find that wasn't what the ultimate achievement was to begin with.
Well, first of all, I'm a big believer in exactly what you're saying. Begin with the end in mind. Too many people launch into a project and they don't know exactly where it is they're going. If you can decide in your mind very clearly what it is that you want to work toward, then it becomes an awful lot easier. And I'm not so sure at the end that it's got that it's over feeling. I think you know that segment has definitely ended. Then you can set a whole new goal and go on to whatever comes next. And that's probably what's happened with Jesse's journey. The adventures on the road, and we had 1995 to begin with, and then the Cross Canada project in 1998. We knew exactly what the end was going to be. We didn't know the outcome,
Right.
but we knew, from a time standpoint, we knew when this was going to end. And we knew that whatever happened, and I suppose we'd have to say whatever happened financially, would start to dictate what our next goal or project was going to look like in order to get us to that even bigger end where we knew we had to have X number of dollars probably to begin an endowment that would actually feed and help research. So, yeah, I think a lot of people would do themselves a big service if they begin with the end in mind. And oftentimes people don't do that. And don't worry if the thing doesn't look like anything like what you expected it would when you thought, okay, I'll just start out here, and I'm going to do this and this and this. Well, I can't do that. Oh, well, I'll have to adjust that and do this. Sometimes when you make a beginning, and that's the other thing, you must make start somewhere. I had a friend who was building a wall in Scotland at his property, and he had hired this Polish stonemason. And this friend of mine was saying, well, we could put it over here, or maybe we should start with and this fellow just said, you must make start. Even if you lay bricks right here where we're standing, and a month from now there's no bricks here because we got this far and thought, oh no, this is wrong, it belongs over there. But you, at the beginning of any project, I liked that Polish phrase because he spoke in rather broken English, and his words were as true can be. You must make start. And at the end, keep in mind, begin with the end in mind. And all the magic will happen in between those 2 points.
When you decided to make start the first time, not even to get out onto the road, but just to do something, anything, what did that look like within your own mind, with conversations with family, with Jesse? What was the genesis of making that start?
Well, first of all, I'm a big believer in research. When we got the bad news and the diagnosis, and you did some homework, if I can back up just a little bit, first of all, you cry, and then you go through a bit of anger, and you go through why us, and why doesn't something like this happen to somebody really bad? Yeah. And so you have to get rid of all that stuff, get it out of your system, and say, okay, we got two choices. We can roll over and play dead here and just let whatever happens, happens, or we can roll up our sleeves and get busy and try and make a difference. And we decided we wanted to make a difference. And I thought, well, I don't know a lot about research, but I know this much. If it doesn't get funded, it doesn't happen. And we needed research because that's where the answers lie. And I said to myself, how does my buying another wheelchair help solve this problem? And the answer was, it doesn't. And I thought, well, we're going to focus on research. And we didn't have a dime, so I thought this is going to be a big job because research is expensive. A lot of it is dead end. It's like throwing Jello at the wall. You got to throw a lot before a little bit sticks, and then you got something to build on. But I thought we have to start somewhere, so let's make start. So I got the maps out, and I laid out what I thought was a route that I could probably handle. I was 49 years old at that point. And I talked to Jesse about it, and at first he thought I was completely nuts. And he said, "Are you nuts?" And I said, "I may be, Jess, but I never let that get in the way of what I want to do." And eventually he bought into the idea, and then it became an exciting adventure for him, and he got to do a lot of things that I can talk about a little later probably. But we did lay out the route on the map, and I thought, yeah, I could do that. And then we got the team together, and I was all by myself at the beginning, so I looked at what are the building blocks I need here. So I needed transportation, accommodation, communication, and all those kinds of things. And I didn't have friends ready to step into this category. I went the other way. I identified the jobs first, then find the people to plug into those jobs who'd be the best person for that. And eventually, I mean, you'll have friends come along who say, "Gee, John, I want to help out too. What can I do there?" And they don't have a skill set that you need. What do you say to those people? You put them all in the cheering section, and you just say, "I'm going to need you to keep calling me and saying, 'Keep going, John. We're watching you here from back home, and saw a story in the paper,' or whatever it might be." Make sure that they feel engaged as well, even if they don't have that, accounting or accommodation or communication skill, whatever it might be that you were looking for. And so it was a lot of work to put all that together. And then we got the motorhome, which was someone helped us find and source that. And we got the drivers put in place, volunteers, fuel, all kinds of things. And so then you all have to get in the motorhome and the two escort vehicles we had. And you got to drive from London to the Manitoba border. And this all looks pretty good, about till you get north of Sudbury. And then, I didn't know the hills were quite this big. Mm-hmm. And that's just the beginning, because once you pass Wawa, and the hardest part physically is from Wawa to Nipigon, around the top of Lake Superior, then you think, oh my God, what have I dragged all these people into? Because these hills were just endless and monstrous. But I thought, well, we'll start out and do our best. And the day we started, on a Saturday, in May of 1995, the wind was blowing the snow sideways. And I remember Ron Calhoun, who was a great mentor for me and had worked with Terry Fox, and he said to those who were assembled there, pretty small crowd, he said, Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy didn't pick the perfect day to strike, and we're not picking the perfect day to strike back. So off we went. And a couple of days later, we had reached Kenora, and now we're starting to get just a little bit of a routine, because we were making it up as we went. We'd never done this before. I had trained, but training's one thing. The game's another.
You had Jesse with you for this?
For the 1995 journey, yes.
So just for those that may be unfamiliar, when you're talking about the wind coming sideways, it's more than a matter of trying to trudge up and down those hills yourself.
Exactly.
You're actually pushing your son in the wheelchair through this.
That's right. And the plan was to push Jesse 3,300 kilometers from the Manitoba border to Thunder Bay, around the top of Lake Superior, down through the Muskokas and cottage country, cut west to the shoreline of Lake Huron, down to Bayfield, Grand Bend, Sarnia, Windsor, turn at Windsor, head toward London, Kitchener, Kingston, Rockville, and then on up to Ottawa. So it was a long route. But here we are a couple of days into this, and this was kind of funny. We're coming into Kenora, and we're thinking, yeah, we got this figured out. We know what we're doing here. And you're feeling pretty pumped. And you leave Kenora, and you turn the corner, and you look at the sign, and it says, Sudbury, 692 kilometers. And then all of a sudden, reality hits. And we thought, okay, we probably have bitten off quite a bit here, but when you've bitten off quite a bit, just try and chew it in small pieces. So we'll just do a day at a time. And that's exactly what we did.
What are some of the challenges from that first trek that are particularly memorable to you?
I think it always comes down to the people. And it's quite funny. You'll run into people who say, "No, I'm going to move from here. It's not that great here. I'm going down the road to wherever." Mm-hmm. And when you've come into this place, you're pushing Jesse through there, and you see KFC and McDonald's and Canadian Tire and Tim Hortons and all the franchise everything. And you get a little further down the road to where this person said, "No, I'm moving over there. It's that much better." And when you arrive there, you see KFC and McDonald's and Canadian Tire. They're all the same. It's not what the place has to offer. It's what you have to offer it.
There you go.
So if you're going in there looking for it to do everything for you, doesn't matter where you move. It's not going to be much fun.
There are a lot of universal principles that you're dropping on us already here, John. I hope that people are paying attention and taking notes. I'd point them out, but we've got too much that I want to cover.
Well, yeah.
But it's good advice for much more than just a quest such as you're talking about. Here's something I've wanted to ask you for a long time, especially given that just the night before you and I are sitting here today enjoying each other's company. I have two sons. My oldest boy is just a couple of years younger than Jesse was at the time that you set out. And just even last night, we did what I often do. When dinner is done and the dishes are cleaned up and everybody wants to go and retire to their cell phones or television or whatever it might be, I say to them, "Guys, want to just join me for a walk?" And they always say, "Yeah." Just to get out and just be together. It's amazing if we're just walking together, we talk with each other. And
Yep.
I've always really valued that and feel very grateful that they're up for that and participate, I think, enthusiastically. I've always wondered about what not just that first trek, but all of it, but maybe even especially, I guess, John, all of that time together might have meant to you and to Jesse, your son.
Well, first off, as you know, there were two journeys. The first one in 1995, across Ontario with Jesse.
Yep.
And I should preface that the 1998 walk across Canada, which spilled just into 1999, was without Jesse. And if people wonder why, it's because it was going to involve parts of 2 winters, and I could not take him with me. By that time, Jesse was a little older, the disease had advanced a little more, and this would have been looked upon as some kind of cruel and unusual punishment. So I knew I couldn't take him with me. And when people ask me which one was the better, I don't mind saying that 1995 probably was. 98 might have been more grueling for me because of its length. But Jesse and I were on the road for 124 days together in 1995. And in that time period, Jesse was 15. But I think in reality, I left home with a 14-year-old, and 124 days later, I came home with a 16-year-old. Even though he was 15 throughout the entire thing. I just watched him blossom and mature in front of me. And I think when you're having a walk with your kids, that's exactly what you're watching. Maybe in small doses, but that's what any parent would be seeing in relation to the amount of time you get to spend with your children, regardless of the activity. And sometimes it's better if it's not the activity that you think it'll be. Lots of times, and I don't wish to disparage what parents do, but if all of that time is spent, as happens with a lot of families, shuffling back and forth to arenas and hockey and all that's fine, or ringette or whatever it might be, or figure skating or something, all that's fine. That's all in the category of what the child or young person really wants to do. But to also get that extra time of, hey, let's make butter tarts together, or any of those kinds of things like, hey, I see they're having an open house at this farm. How much do you really know about farms? Let's go see. And there's millions of things you can do that do not involve huge cost. When they say that the best things in life are free, they're not kidding, because there are times when you're in the city, there's so much light around you that it's great fun if you're driving along in the country sometime and you've got the kids with you and it's nighttime. Just pull into some farm laneway where it's really dark and say, hey, Let me get the binoculars out. Look at this. You ever really seen the Big Dipper or looked at the moon up close? And you can do that without gobs of expense for equipment. The walk along the shore, rather than just sitting there playing beach games and so on, is quality time that you can never get back. You have to consume it. You have to use it up that day, because you can't have that day back tomorrow. So you only get them one at a time. So you want to try and spend as much time living every day if you can. And if you get that opportunity with your kids, that's even better, because we all think when there's so much activity with your kids, whether it's school, homework, watching the Leafs on TV or something, you think you've got tons and tons of time. But you know what? It runs out. It really does. And it runs out way too soon. And then all of a sudden, the house gets really quiet when they've moved on, and you think, God, did I spend enough time with them? Did I get them ready all right? And you never know. So you use that time, cherish every moment, and fill your life up with good stuff.
See, on that trek that you had in 1995, not only did you have that time together, but I'm guessing that if we can dive a little deeper, John, into the reality of the context, that both of you were aware that Jesse was afflicted with something that you both knew was unlikely to get better.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that he was very much aware of that and understood.
Yeah, this is, I don't know how much your listeners would know about Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, but it is the most common ailment in genetic difficulty in children. Affects boys only. I shouldn't say only. I always use the words almost exclusively. It's like 99.99999% boys. And that's because of where the XY chromosomes are located, and that it's brought down from the mom, oftentimes, as happened in our case. The mom is the carrier and frequently does not know that that's the case. In our case, in our family, just a genetic fluke. There was no history at all. And if you are a carrier and you have a male child, you have a 50-50 chance that that child would have Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Those, Kevin, are lousy odds.
Yeah.
And I've known families where the sister did not have children because she knew what her sister had gone through in having a family. And yet, these people would have been wonderful, wonderful parents, but they were afraid. And I don't blame them, because they maybe couldn't handle that. But they went on, and these people, and did great things with so many other families and so on, but they just didn't get to have kids themselves because of that. So it's a tough disease, really tough, And at the time that we began, these boys seldom ever made it past their teen years. Now, things are a little better. And Jesse was rather miraculous. He made it to 29. And I think that's because he was an inspiration for a lot of other people. And he stayed active and wanted to be part of everything. And it was just the way he led his life that I think helped him live as long as he did.
How did that compare with what you thought might happen when you first got the news, in terms of how long he'd be with you? To put it more plainly, did you think he would live that long?
No, I probably did not. I was hoping he'd make it into his 20s, just to beat the can't make it out of your teens story. But then he did remarkably well. And it was sheer determination on his part, and having the right mental outlook. And there was never a moment of, oh, poor me. He was too busy doing stuff to ever have that kind of feeling.
Presence again. Being in on the journey, I suppose, as opposed to being aware of a potential. But I think you've raised yet another really important point. you could go out on that, and I'm going to single the two of you out almost uncomfortably because you're the two in the context of this story and the reality that you lived. Jesse is the one with Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, so you would assume that he would be the one to go first, but you didn't necessarily know that. None of us know when our time is up.
No, but you do have probably history to go by, and we all know that we expect a chronological order of dispatch. We are supposed to leave here before our children.
And yet tomorrow's not promised to us.
No,
I
it's
guess
not promised to anyone. It's
Yeah.
not promised to anyone. But, parents are not supposed to still be here when their children aren't.
I'd like to go back a little bit further in the story just to give some context to what your life was looking like at that time. You'd had a very successful career in broadcasting and quite well known in the community. And I'm curious about what was going on maybe in your professional and obviously your personal life. The front burner issue would be what was happening with Jesse. But to give an idea of what you had to kind of rearrange maybe in order to decide to go out on this initial quest.
Yeah. I suppose I didn't really sit back and think a lot about the family once I knew they were on board and on side, because we were so busy putting all the bits and pieces in place to make this happen. In hindsight, when I look back on it, I think that what Sherene did was really the heroic story, because she was very much the silent partner who lived in the background, particularly while we were going across Canada. I'm busily marching down the road and doing interviews and doing my best to raise money and trying to accomplish, as we did, 33 kilometers each and every day. And what would that be, Kevin, like 17, 18 miles, something like that? No, maybe it's got to be about 20, just to make that conversion for people. But anyway, 33 kilometers a day. And lots of times it was pretty darn tiring. But it may have been tiring for me, but I knew that after I had supper, I had about half an hour, 45 minutes, and then I was going to bed because we had to be up at 6 the next morning, and off we'd go. So here's the real hero in the story is Sherene, who's busy back home at London, and she's looking after 3 kids, one of whom has a disability and makes use of a wheelchair. This is when we're going across Canada.
Right.
And she's the one painting the house, doing the dishes, paying the taxes, getting the groceries, getting kids shuffled off to various activities and so on, cutting the grass, doing all those things that had to be done, and never uttered a word of complaint about doing that. And when I look back on it, I can't believe the amount of work that she had to do.
You didn't come home in that 286-day stretch?
Only when we were in London did I actually sleep in my own bed then. That made sense to me.
I never even thought about that. You had a relentless tour schedule of consecutive dates that ran almost a year.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened.
So she was single parenting it without her husband in all the context that you just described for almost a full calendar year.
Yep.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'd never even considered it. I bet a lot of people are in the same column as me.
Well, if you want to give it some context here, in the Cross Canada project, Sherene came and saw me in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and then I did not see her again until London, and then I saw her in Wawa, Ontario, Northern Ontario, and then I did not see her again until Victoria.
Wow.
So it was a long time apart. Now, we talked every day, unless I was really tired or the phone lines weren't very good or something like that. But, yeah, we talked every day.
What went into having completed the initial trek across Ontario, then you decide that you're going to do the whole country? Why?
Because we weren't there yet. We raised about $1.5 million in our first adventure going across Ontario in that 124 days that we were together in 1995. And then we gave that money to research. And I kind of felt like Homer Simpson was like, oh, the money was gone. And I thought, well, that wasn't very smart. Why didn't I build something like an endowment, some vehicle that will generate dollars in the future? So I thought, we're going to have to build an endowment. That means we're going to have an even bigger project. And so off I went, this time alone, and in 1998 doing 33 kilometers a day. And as we said, we're out there 286 days. And at the end of that story, we then had the endowment kick-started. We had enough money to get going. And we have now built that endowment to close to 15 million. And we have given out over and above the endowment, we have given out over 9 million. So we started off with those two projects that we had that really got us going. And now, what I call Canada's smallest and hardest working charity, with 4 people, we give out over $1 million a year now to research. And I think that those people who are listening right now and know someone who has maybe recently received the news that no parent wants to hear, that your child has Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, they can take heart that I think that that youngster has a good chance of being a winner and beating that disease.
What are some of the things you've heard from people that are facing that situation that have, I'm guessing, must have reached out to you over the years? Yeah, a lot of them have said that Jesse's journey really gave them hope when they didn't feel there was any. Every family I've met had more or less been given the bad news and then kind of been left to design their own toolbox to figure out, well, what are we going to do here? And they kind of make their way through life. And so we were able to connect the dots for some of those families, because oftentimes if you are in a town, you might be the only family facing that. And it's awfully nice to know that you can pick up the phone now and there's somebody else who's in the same situation, and that you can, lift each other up and make sure that we're all still feeling as positive as we can be, knowing that we're up against a really tough disease. How does it make you feel, John, when you reflect back on some of the impact that you just shared about the size of the endowment and the annual commitment and things of that nature? We're tossing these numbers and this reality around almost casually, having a conversation between the two of us. But if we can reverse it all the way back to just you and Sherene and Jesse talking about what should we do, or maybe even before that, the phase that you mentioned maybe 20 minutes ago, why us, why now, not fair, and none of it can bring Jesse back, of course, but to think about that impact that can be made, what does that feel like?
Well, you feel pleased that you did what you did. A couple of thoughts come up here. One was, I remember the morning that we started the Cross Canada trek, and I'm standing there at a little place called Kitty in Newfoundland. It's just outside of St. John's, and I'm looking out at the Atlantic Ocean, and I'm thinking, it is closer to Ireland than it is to Vancouver. What am I doing here? I'm not an athlete. I'm just a regular dad. And I'm thinking, can I really do this? I had no idea. I thought, well, it's a big country, and I could probably forgive myself if I couldn't make it. But I could not forgive myself if I didn't go out and try, because that would dog me the rest of my life, always wondering, what would have happened if you had gone and tried? And so I just gave myself that little reality check. I said, is this journey personally meaningful to me? The answer was yes. Is it challenging enough? Yes. And am I committed enough? I thought, yeah, I think I am. And when those 3 lights turned green, that's when I knew I was ready to go. And off we went, and it's like every other day. Just do your best. And I never thought beyond the province I was in. If I had, I probably wouldn't have made it. It took me 30 days to cross Newfoundland, and I never thought about Nova Scotia. I never thought about Prince Edward Island or any of the provinces that were yet to come. I just focused on the one that I was in. I was willing to make start and that the begin with the end in mind. Okay, I want the end to be Port aux Basques, Newfoundland, a month from now. And when you get to North Sydney and Cape Breton, okay, I want the end to be Pictou, Nova Scotia, where I'm going to get on the ferry to go to Prince Edward Island 18 days from now. And then I got an easy one. I want to be at the Confederation Bridge to make the crossover to New Brunswick 4 days from now, because it's PEI is pretty small. So you just you did what you could, and as I say, it was challenging, and I just asked myself, can I really do this? And as I said, I'm not an athlete, but the thing I had going for me was that I knew in my heart that you're talking about your kids. And when you look in the mirror, just ask yourself, what wouldn't you do for your kids? And then you just get out there and do your best. And if you've done your best, nobody can take that away from you. You can look in the mirror and say, okay, look, maybe I didn't have a BA and an MA and a PhD to go out and do this, but damn it, I did my best. Nobody can take that away from you.
Last I checked, John, this podcast had been downloaded in 16 or 17 different countries. So for the benefit of somebody that's in maybe one of the smaller ones, geographically speaking, I'll encourage you to maybe pause this now and go pull up, I don't think people use atlases or globes anymore, do they? Maybe pull up Google Maps and just have a look at Canada so that you can see.
It's a big place.
Yeah. It's. I wonder if you'd done a similar trek across Europe, how many different countries you would have actually encountered. But would have been a bunch.
Maybe to give that a bit of context, we could look at it this way. And as you say, your podcast is being heard in many countries around the world, and not everybody knows Canada. But we're talking here about 6 time zones. And it's a country that's the second largest country in the world, largest country in the Western Hemisphere. Canada is huge.
Yeah.
And yet, oddly enough, with our approximately 33 million, I suppose we could say, people, very small population, and 90% of Canada lives within 100 miles of the U.S. border. So we're kind of a long, skinny country going east to west. We're kind of like Chile going the other way. So it's very strung out, and it's an amazing country when you think we have 10 provinces. But what we also have is more or less 5 distinct geographic regions, from Newfoundland through the heartland and the industrial part of Canada and the center, and then the prairie provinces and the mountains and of the west coast and so on. And it's amazing that the whole country sticks together. It's quite truly amazing when you think that farmer in Saskatchewan who's got that wheat crop in the field year after year, when he's in downtown St. John's talking to that fisherman, he probably wouldn't even understand what the guy was saying. And yet, they're both Canadians, and that's what makes the whole thing stick. And when there's a drought in the west, there's a train with nothing but hay on it leaving Ontario to help. And when you have an ice storm in Quebec, there are generators and blankets and emergency provisions coming from Western Canada and from down east and all over the place. That's what we do. We help each other. And that's what makes it a fact that Canada shows up as right at the top and one of the best places in the world to live.
It's a lot of steps to go for any reason at all. A lot of opportunity for sprains, joint pains, breaks, falls.
Mm-hmm.
What were some times, if any, where you might have been concerned that you might have to hang it up for a bit or take a rest or something like that, or that you might not make it?
Well, there was always that possibility that you would, suffer some kind of an injury. I was old enough and smart enough at that stage of my life. At 49, you've got a little more life experience than when you're 23.
Yeah.
So you're not out to try and hurry and get this done. And let's be honest, nobody wins the Indy 500 in the first lap.
Yep.
So, you just take your time. You got a lot of time to be out here, and you're just very careful about what you're doing, and you settle into a pace pretty darn quick. And we knew, even when Jesse and I were together in that first journey, we knew that pushing a wheelchair, we weren't staying on that gravel. We'd still be out there right now if we'd stayed in the gravel. We had to get onto the road, so we had to push out there and claim our space. And fortunately, we had OPP and right behind us, and I was never ever on the road without cover at the back. Whether it was the OPP, and then when they had to go to court or something, we'd have one of our own vans with the flashing lights and so on. And the truck drivers got to know exactly where we were, and they would chit-chat up and down the line about where we were each day, and they'd give you a big honk and so on when they went by. We became quite a story for them. But I kind of lost my train of thought here, but you do have to get out there and claim your space and make sure people know that you're not moving. You're going to have to go around me here because I got something important I'm doing. I've only got one chance in life to do it, so I'm doing it right now.
I'm not quite sure how to ask you this. Forgive me in advance, or I'll ask your forgiveness if I flail around a little bit.
That's okay.
Well, I'm curious about, we've touched on an idea of, I guess, what I'll call authenticity, John, where you mentioned, I'm paraphrasing, but that no matter where you are who you are. Mm-hmm. So I've always kind of wondered what it's like to be associated with, for want of a much more appropriate term, a brand, an entity, an idea that has almost taken on a life of its own, that is part of and was precipitated by you and Jesse and everyone that contributed, but is not John Davidson or Jesse Davidson, that the two are together and yet separate. And so I guess what I'm trying to ask is what it's like to be maybe immediately associated with something that is considered to be you, but is sort of its own separate thing. Do you see kind of what I'm getting at in a roundabout sort of way?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to when the idea first came along. And I can tell you exactly where the idea came from. At the time that Jesse was diagnosed, your life changes. And I was needed around the house to help do some moving, lifting. And I took my golf clubs and I stuck them in the corner of the garage, and they sat there for 10 years. I never went back. And I wanted to stay in shape, so I was walking in the neighborhood, and I got to know all the dogs by name and saw how people stacked the wood in their garage and hung their bicycles up and so on. And that got a little boring after a while. So then I would get Sherene to drop me off out in the country, and I'd just walk home. And I don't know how many of your listeners would ever have heard of this place, but I'm sure some of them have. So I was getting dropped off in Ilderton, and I'd walk home from there. So that was about 22, 23 kilometers at the time. And as you come south from Ilderton, as soon as you come out of the village, there's a little bit of a downhill by the fire hall there, a little bit of rolling countryside. It was the fall, and there was wheat in the field's end. It was just waving back and forth. I had my earphones on, and I was listening to Peter Zosky, and all of a sudden the thought came to me, I wonder if we could ever turn this walking into anything. And the thought disappeared just as fast. And the next time I was out walking, the same thought came to me again. And I thought, wait a minute. Somebody trying to tell me something here? Mm-hmm. And so I thought, okay, let's just think about this. What if we, I wonder if we were to, and next thing you knew, the project was getting launched in my mind. And we just took it from there. So that's where the thought originally came from. And after that, it was a case of, yes, we put the building blocks that we needed for that first adventure, and a lot of volunteers and a lot of people. By then we had a body of work going, and when we got around to the second one, there were people who wanted to volunteer. And that was an amazing story as well. I'll tell you in a moment. But yeah, it became the Jesse's Journey thing, and John and Jesse were probably in those years reasonably well known, if I could say that. I'm not comfortable saying that, but in this part of the world. But I wanted to make sure that it wasn't about us. It was about all those boys that we had never met before and their families, because we took the view in the Davidson household when diagnosis came along that if we're going to do something, we're not in this for as long as Jesse's here. We're in this for the long haul, for people we'd never met before. And now that we're pretty much up and running, I guess you'd say, I'm more than happy to get out of the way and let younger people with brighter ideas than my ideas take over and run with this and see how far they can make it go, because we're doing some pretty exciting things with research. So,
Yeah, you just pointed out what was so plainly in front of my nose I couldn't see it. You already answered the question that I just asked. Is that it isn't ultimately about us, or in this case about you. You started it, but then once it action is taken and a thought gets turned into an action and a reality, it's then over to whomever else wants to participate, and it becomes part of their experience. It becomes bigger than us. Not about us, is it?
Yep. No, I have sometimes looked at us on videotape at different times, and you look back and see what happened, and you end up sitting there saying, wow, look at those two guys. They're really working hard. And you don't realize it's yourself. And the same as when Jesse received the Order of Ontario, that time that we were at Queen's Park, I remember thinking, they pinned this on you, but we really shared that with everybody. Everybody who volunteered, everybody who worked on the home team or the road team, whichever it was, and everyone who ever contributed, everyone who ever gave a dime to Jesse's journey. We shared it with all of those people, because they're the ones who were actually making the real magic happen, which is the ability to fund research. I was just lucky enough to lead the parade a couple of times, and people believed in what we were doing, but they're the people who are they're the heroes who are making a difference in that youngster who's being diagnosed today.
Let's talk a little bit more about the volunteers, because you did bring them up a moment ago. And I was going to ask, why do you think from the time where you got that voice that said, maybe this walk can turn into something more, and then didn't give it another thought, and then it came back and you recognized maybe there's something here. So I wonder, how come some people act on that and some people don't? But then there's the next tier, is the recognizing somebody that's acted and then getting off the sidelines and saying, I'm going to support him or her. Mm-hmm. So that's a real act of hope and courage too, I think.
Yeah. Well, they gave me a lift. So did the people who were along the side of the road, whether it was when Jesse and I were together or when I was alone going across Canada. And I remember on about the end of the second day coming out of St. John's, Newfoundland, I was walking down the Trans-Canada, and the RCMP were right behind me, and there were a few people out there, and there's a guy at the side of the road. Keep her going, buddy. And wow, that just fills the tank like you wouldn't believe when somebody believes in what you're trying to do. I got inspiration from them, and then when volunteers came out, they got inspired by what they saw happening out there. And just to give you the numbers story, I think there were 4 or 6 of us in the permanent road team, and then we had a couple of volunteers who showed up, and they flew in at their own expense from different parts of Canada to be with us. And honest to God, Kevin, they'd arrive on a Saturday and they had eyes the size of saucers, like, oh my God, what have I got myself into? Who are these people? And they got about less than 1 hour of information as to what you had to do, what time you had to have tea ready at a break at 10:30 in the morning, and the fresh fruit's got to be there and ready to go, and then we clear that off, and John's back on the road with the crew, and then you're getting lunch ready, and after lunch is done, you're cleaning that up. Afternoon snacks got to be ready, and then there's supper arrangements and so on. And then we got laundry to do, and this goes here and that goes there, and here's where we store these, and these batteries got to be charged up every night for the walkie-talkies that are required. It was a full load, and they they just looked on that Saturday that they arrived like they were thinking, oh my God, why did I ever put my hand up and say, yes, I'll go? They looked like they regretted it. Then on Sunday, they would see the 2 volunteers that they were relieving getting ready to depart. And it was, I didn't like to be there sometimes because it was just too hard, but the volunteers would be in tears. They didn't want to go, you know. It was just the most exciting week of their life. And I still see some of them, and they immediately talk about it, about how that changed their life, how they saw people differently. And at the end of that week, those 2 new volunteers who'd had the crash course on laundry and peanut butter sandwiches and tea and fruit, and all the things you had to do to keep the motorhome going, they were the same way. There were a lot of tears and hugging going on, and people would say, "Can we stay? We would just let us stay for another week." But there were other people coming to take their place, and and that's why I say when I got to Victoria, you didn't want it to end in a way. You didn't want it to end for them because you saw so many people bonding with each other and having their lives changed about what volunteerism is all about.
What does that tell us about how people actually are?
People are great. They just, they sometimes put themselves down just a little bit. They don't think they're capable of doing things. And I've had a lot of time to think about this after we lost Jesse. I thought, what would he want me to do now? And I thought, he'd probably want me to take all those people who had something they want to do. They want to learn to play guitar, write a book, learn to paint, ride their bicycle across Canada, climb Mount Fuji, take up photography, whatever it is they want to do, but they haven't done it because they think, I don't think I'd be any good at that. You never know. And Jess would say, take those people, push them over the edge, get them to go and try, and let them know that if they fail, that's quite okay. At least you had a shot at it. Just do not get to that rocking chair when it's time to retire and sit there thinking, gee, if only I had. I wish I should have. Maybe I could have. Go and try it. The best way to find out how to do something is to oftentimes find out how not to do it. I mean, Edison failed 10,000 times before that light bulb finally went on. So don't be afraid to fail. Failing teaches you oftentimes much more than winning does. You'll hear good coaches of little kids will tell them that sometimes failing teaches you more than passing does. So go ahead and try stuff. I mean, not the ridiculous stuff. I have no interest in jumping out of an airplane with a parachute or bungee jumping. They're not things that interest me. But I've gone back to some things that I did as a youngster, and I couldn't be happier.
If somebody asked me if I wanted to walk across a country the size of Canada or jump out of an airplane, I'd have to give it some consideration.
That airplane be looking pretty good.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I'm not exactly lining up to do that either, though, John. Before we wrap up, I'm curious about what are some of the things that stimulate you now, that you enjoy challenging you, or that you find great presence and comfort in and enjoyment of?
Well, I'll tell you, I've been through this exercise in the last year, and because I'm 71, I am, I suppose, in the golf parlance, playing the back nine of life now. And so I have gone through a list of all those things that I like doing, hobbies and so on, and gosh, that list was way too long. And I thought, this is frustrating because a lot of these things I'm never going to get to in my life. So let's not kid ourselves here. Pick the 3 or 4 you really, really like and forget the rest. And so I have got out of some things that I thought I was going to do, and I couldn't be happier. So I'm much more a minimalist. If Canada is hoping that John Davidson will keep them in the black because of his economic purchases, the country's in serious trouble because I don't buy a lot of stuff. And I find that if you can find those 2 or 3 things, you'll be happy. It's the same as people want to have lots and lots of friends. Don't worry about that. If you can count real friends on one hand, you'll be happy. And I found I was doing, having come from a broadcast background, my wife Sherene says to me, John, you don't talk to people. You interview them. I said, I don't. And she says, yes, you do. And I said, well, it's just by way of getting conversations started. So I had been asking people, and I'll ask you this, Kevin, and your listeners. I hope they'll think about this. What did you most like in public school that you haven't done for a long, long time? Mm-hmm. Oftentimes that answer will have something to do with music. I don't wish to be rude here, but I will say it this way. I've discovered there are a lot of guys who are pissed off that they didn't get to play the triangle in grade 1. They got stuck with the little hammer with the Coke bottle caps on it, and they're still regretting this.
That's right.
So I said to myself, okay, let's be fair here, John. If you were to ask yourself, what did you most like in public school that you haven't done for a long, long time, it would be art. I loved it. And so I've gone back to it, having taken 55 years off. And I have discovered, I said to myself, okay, well, if I'm going to ask people that, I better be honest with myself. I'll get some pencils and see if there's anything left in the tank. And I really like it. And I want to spend more time doing that and gardening and just looking up at the sky every day. Because even people who are busy running from building to building while they're waiting for the subway or to get to their car in the parking lot or whatever, their eyes never go above their own height. They're just seeing everything down here. If you just stop and look up every now and then, the world's not that bad a place. So maybe I'm a bit of a dreamer in that sense, but I was a dreamer when I thought I could go across Ontario with Jesse and then go across Canada. Did I know I could do it? Of course not. But I knew I could go and try. I didn't know if I could complete 286 days, but I knew I could complete the first day because I'd trained for that. So that's what Jesse would want me to do. Take those people, push them over the edge, and get them to go and try. And if people just try, you'd be surprised how much you can do, and you'll surprise yourself.
Well, I was thinking, John, that where we started with this version of the story, of the conclusion of the trek across Canada, really was kind of a new beginning for a chapter that continues to go on. And who knows how far and how long this conversation will reach. Hopefully it will reach some people that will pick up the pencils or the triangle or the jogging shoes or whatever it might be. But
when I go out and speak, I leave that message with people that you can do anything if you just try. And yes, they hand you the check, which I give to the charity, and they shake hands with you, and you pose for a picture, and that's all nice. But the really nice part is when 2 years later, somebody sends you an email and says, I heard you speak at so-and-so, and I did take up stained glass, and I'm doing really well at it. That feels great.
That's as good a place I can think of as to leave off as any. John, I'm so grateful that you would share this time with me. It's really been a pleasure and a gift, and I look forward to sharing this with anyone who wants to invest their time to listen. I know that they'll be glad that they did. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kevin. Much appreciated.
There are a couple of different ways that you could reach out to John. One is through the Jesse's Journey website at jessesjourney.com. At that site, you'll learn all about the journey, the organization, about Duchenne, the research that they're doing, and how you can help. And if you'd like to make a donation or volunteer some help, I'm sure they would welcome the opportunity to hear from you. And by all means, if you know of someone who is affected by Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, let's not assume that they know about Jesse's Journey. Please do pass the word along. You can also learn more about John on his website called therightroad.ca. There you can learn more about John's story, his speaking, and his book, which is titled The Right Road, How Far Will You Go?, which was co-written with Sherene Brennan. You can also find Jesse's Journey on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. For links to each of those channels, check the show notes blog post for this episode, which is number 58, at noschedulemanpodcast.com. I'll also put up links to these episodes, which I'm pretty sure that you're going to enjoy if you like this one with John Davidson. Episode 2, way back at the beginning when we started this with Mike Mulligan. It's called Reframing Setbacks to Live with Passion and Purpose. That is quite a story there. Episode 8 with Alfredo Casar, The Incredible Power of Music to Cross All Cultures. And episode 18, Life is a Marathon with Bruce Van Horn. I think you'll like those, and you can find them and all other archived episodes of Journeys with the No Schedule Man on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and at noschedulemanpodcast.com. Now, if you'd like to connect with me, I would love to hear from you. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. My handle on all of those platforms is No Schedule Man, or at No Schedule Man if you like. Don't forget my weekly Footsteps video blog, which is available on the YouTube channel. And if you'd like to learn more about my speaking, workshops, seminars, or one-on-one coaching opportunities, please do visit me at kevinbulmer.com. Thank you again so much for listening. Please do subscribe and share, and I hope to have you here again next week on Journeys with the No Schedule Man.
Just a little deja vu.